the conviction to how important it is for women at any point in their career to be mindful of what's next and working toward what's next is really important, because that's liberating and that's empowering and that's keeping your agency, or rather than putting your agency for your future in someone else's hands.
I'll have what she's having.
Welcome to another edition of
She Talks Confidence
Podcast.
Welcome back. I am a girl dad turned therapist turned now women's confidence and empowerment coach. It's Tony Dufresne, and this is the She Talks Confidence podcast. As usual, welcome back. We're going to throw two doctors at you today, so something's got to stick. We're going to talk today about women transitioning from the first career, the first job, into the second job, or maybe second job into the third job. It's the whole thing about dealing with that first taste, the first experience in the world of having your own job, in the world of adulting, and then moving forward and transitioning, and the things to consider, either staying or going. So I'd like to welcome in Dr. Cynthia Benson Mercer. Hey, Cynthia, how are you?
I'm awesome. Thanks for having me.
You got so much great stuff we want to talk about. First, I want to go through your bio, and I have, by the way, here's your book. It is now near next. I would highly suggest you get this. It looks fantastic. I skimmed through it. I looked at the subject matter. Cynthia is a co-founder of Zeal the Heal and founder of Benson Performance Partners, the business executive, human capital strategist, author, and executive coach, working from the time she was 14. Start early enough for you?
Yeah.
Her leadership journey began early, a working mom and breadwinner serving predominantly male-led industries throughout most of her 30-year career. She was youngest and only female on the executive team. Oh, I want to talk about that. Navigating a progressive career as a chief executive in gaming, hospitality, and healthcare while raising two children and pursuing advanced degrees, Cynthia's experienced the joys and challenges of trying to have it all. Boy, how many times do you hear that? With deep appreciation for those who shined a light for her, and as a social psychologist with a passion to unleash human potential, she feels a personal responsibility to, ready, help women claim their agency and amplify their possibilities.
Absolutely.
Amen.
Amen.
I love it. I love talking to somebody that is on the exact same track as me.
It makes it
just
a lot
love it.
easier, more fun.
It does. Yeah. Hopefully we're not in an echo chamber here. I think with your book and your experience and your mentoring and what we're just trying to serve. So first things first, I want to go through and talk about your specialization, which is your specialization is coaching women through career transition. And I know your career transition you indicated was like mid-20s to 30s.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
My demographic is typically 25 to 40-ish. If you can give us an idea, first of all, your personal story and how that shaped things and what you see now in the environment with women in their first job and considerations leaving or going into the second job, and what are the important things?
Yeah, Tony, I think the reality is whether you are 55, as I was when my career changed suddenly, through a change of control, through a new CEO coming in and a succession plan, my position was eliminated. And I had felt some of the uncomfy feelings that might have been on the radar, but certainly the timing was a surprise. And at that point in my life, as the sole breadwinner, I've got to figure something out pretty quickly. And my first notion was to go do what I've always done, the path of least resistance. But because of the methodology that we put in the book, which is really about start working on your future today, I had a blueprint for an alternative path. The blueprint was intended to serve me 3 to 5 years from now. But instead, I thought, you know what? I have this and I can accelerate this. And for me, the conviction to how important it is for women at any point in their career to be mindful of what's next and working toward what's next is really important, because that's liberating and that's empowering and that's keeping your agency, or rather than putting your agency for your future in someone else's hands.
I think a lot of times with my clients, they go into their first job either because it's the only one that was offered or the first one that was offered, and or it really lined up with their ideology, and they maybe had the few choices and it lined up with their ideology. And I know a lot of times, and you talk about this in the book, when you first get into something like that, first of all, it's a brand new environment, right? Versus college or working at the counter somewhere or whatever you happen to be doing as a college job.
Right.
When you get into it, it is overwhelming. Not only is it overwhelming for just the human being going into it, it's overwhelming more so for a woman. Like you talked about, you were the youngest and the only woman in the executive class. Getting into something like that, do you see women getting overwhelmed and keeping their head down and not considering that next step, like you said? And if that is the case, because now we talked about it briefly before the show, up to 3/4 of the women that are going into the workforce are only in their first job for less than a year. And I saw that from 2 sources. Given that, why do you think that is? And how is it that women can get their head up a little bit and understand really what they should be focusing on in their first job?
I think what the latest generation coming into the workforce, and a lot of the women that are in their mid-20s through their 30s are doing a better job than my generation, is they are intolerant of some environments that don't necessarily line up to their needs, wants, and wishes. And in some ways, I say high five to that. But we also have to be careful we don't swing that pendulum too far, because while there are fewer barriers to entry, it used to be if you didn't stay in a job a certain amount of time, HR people were looking that on your resume, and they were casting you aside if you had jumped around a lot.
Yeah.
People know that's not the case nearly as much anymore. People have moved around a lot, and we've taken that off the table as a criteria. But what I would caution women in that emerging phase of their career is there is something to be said if it's not a toxic environment, if it's not completely in contrast to your value system and your sense of purpose and who you are, to stick it out that first year. It's about seasons. You almost have to get through all the seasons of a position to really enculturate, number one. And then number two, to sit back and it's what can I learn from this experience? Maybe I don't absolutely love this person I'm working for. Maybe this transition from college to this, or from a semi-skilled role in retail or food service or something to this kind of corporate environment is more demanding. The hours are longer. The expectations are different. That can be a huge transition. But to pause and take in, what am I learning from this? What are the cultural dynamics? What are the things that I love about the team, the boss, the aspects of this culture? And what are the things I'm not loving so much that don't fit my personality, my value system, etc.? So again, I'm not suggesting stay in a toxic, unhealthy environment. But I do think that there's value, especially in that first job, of getting through that first year, those 4 seasons, and then drawing your conclusion.
I love how you frame that with the seasons. That's such a great way to, coming from on this side of everything, seeing and understanding there's a lot of learning that can be had being in something for at least a year. It's arbitrary with the 12 months, but that gives you some sort of a timeline in terms of just to be open to it and just to see the differences, because again, it's a brand new gig. It's not like you have any idea in terms of how things work. And you and I know corporates, they all work differently, but the same.
Right.
And and that's a different life than college life. It's a different life than maybe your part-time job life. You really learn a lot if you keep your head up and look around and not take things too personally. I have found that with the millennials and the Gen Zs now, that they're very hypersensitive to all changes and all shifts, and they're very anchored to their ideological position in something. And I'll tell you, anybody older will tell you, you'll have a thought about something and it'll be whatever it is that aligns, and you get this job and you think, oh my God, this is great. But the problem is the ideological positioning of a company is not necessarily the political workings of a company.
That's right.
And then you get into that, and then you're like, hold up a second. There's a lot of stuff happening, and there could be baseline or unconscious misogynistic stuff happening.
Right.
Again, for the corporate structure, the oversensitivity to that, because there's an expectation that they've done all the right things.
Right.
And if you do all the right things and you meet the right people and you find the right job, everything should be right. And then when it's not, everything falls down like a house of cards. And then they're totally distraught. How do you get them out of that mindset and into a more functional mindset?
There's corporate politics, no matter where you go. No matter how wonderful the organization is, there's corporate politics, there's stuff. We're dealing with human beings. And so human beings are human beings, and they're going to be bad actors occasionally. And I watch it with my niece and with others who are in that emerging leader. To your point, when it's not exactly as I expected, I can't believe that person said that or did that or behaved that way. It's let's take up stakes and go. There's so much learning in that. There's so much learning in terms of down the road, right or wrong, being able to navigate corporate culture and corporate politics is real. It isn't perfect. And I've worked in a lot of industries. I've worked in Christian-based organizations where we pray before every meeting. In every organization, and no matter how pure they are.
Yeah, they seem to be, yes, right?
Beings, and we're flawed, and we're not going to always do things the right way. And so if you can look up and be curious about those things, if you can take it from what you and I would appeal to, which is the sort of the psychology of it. Why is that person behaving that way? Why is this? What are the systemic undercurrents of this? And take that in and learn from it. Those skill sets, those observations, that curiosity will carry you far in the future and potentially give you a whole lot of insight as you think about your next.
100%. And the thing that I tell my women, because they have an expectation that they know things, and then they get into it where they know way more than Brett in the corner.
Right.
And they've probably been there a little bit longer than him, but he's loud and he's overconfident, and he just got promoted. And that happens all the time.
All the time.
And it's because it's not about knowing more. It's about staking your claim and creating your position and establishing yourself in that way. And there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of women come in with this notion that they're not boisterous and they're more subdued and they're more in control, which I got to be honest, that's typically what women are compared to guys. And they get into that with the expectation that the higher ups will see that I have the skills, and they'll see that I have the talent, and they'll want me to be a part of that next step. Whereas a lot of times that doesn't happen, and then it's totally demoralizing. You talked about toxicity. Can you name off, kind of list the deal breakers when it comes to it is time to get out because this has turned into a very toxic environment?
I can. I think that's really personal. There's the obvious things, right? Sexual harassment, hostility that's abusive. Those absolutely should be non-negotiables. What I work with my clients, and I think you do as well, is what is your list of values professionally? What are the things that you value professionally? What is your mission statement? What is your sense of purpose? And being clear about that, not just in your head, but writing that down, having clarity, because you're going to go into an organization that's going to have a mission statement on the wall and values that are spelled out in your orientation guide, etc. And making certain that there's alignment with your values and your sense of purpose and the organization you're working for, I think is part of it. So that starts to create your non-negotiables. Now, again, you have to be careful because if you're too absolute in some of those in that first job, are you being open to the idea that your values and your purpose also may evolve and change as you grow in career and you grow as a professional? And so keeping that in mind. But certainly non-negotiables, things where boundaries aren't respected, which is something that happens to women all the time. Once again, how are you resolving that conflict? It doesn't mean that you just take your ball and go home. It might mean that you need to have a conversation. If you feel as though there are microaggressions, that you're getting overlooked and you internalize it because you're a woman, or you internalize certain things happening, you're asked to get the coffee or make the notes or what have you. If you internalize it, that's not always the case, but you may internalize it that way, is having that private conversation before you just decide that, this is a misogynistic culture and I'm out of here. But I think the non-negotiables are really important. But I want to harken back to something you said about the looking up and Brent in the corner tapped. Oftentimes women are conditioned to put their head down, work hard, and that my performance will speak for itself.
Yes.
Men generally are not conditioned that way.
Nope.
And even if somebody tried, good luck, right? They're looking forward, they're driven, they're moving. And I say that with love and care. I think we need to rip a page out of the man's playbook and tell
totally
women
agree.
that, right?
Yeah.
That people are not mind readers. So if you have aspirations, those need to be communicated. And if your boss isn't asking, you need to proactively create a conversation where you say, my goal is X, and I would love to see that happen by this date. What are your thoughts on that? Is that a reasonable expectation? What would I need to do for that to happen? Engage that conversation.
That is it. And the big problem I see with the younger generation is the social skills aspects of that, and the fact that they're not proactive in getting that conversation going along with their upper.
Right. That's right.
It's funny. If you go into Carol Dweck's stuff with mindset, if you go into Claire Shipman's book with confidence for women, if you look at anything in regards to confidence, I forgot her first name, but Milkman has an essence of change. She's got a great book on that. There's one solution, and interestingly enough, it's being slightly overconfident is the key, and especially in that working corporate world, because you're going to go into it, and sadly, women have been programmed in this whole thing about they're the ones raising their hands. They're the ones that have the answer. They're the ones that are getting positive reinforcement for knowing things and doing the right things and not throwing pencils around the classroom. So when you get up to the corporate world, it works totally opposite of that. Not that you're throwing pencils at people, but the fact is that being a little more proactive, and like I tell some of my more shy or introverted clients, it's not about being extroverted, and it's not about running around with a lampshade, and it's not about taking everybody to 4 martini lunches. It's just about exactly what you said, being proactive and having that communication and letting your supervisor, letting your manager know what your state of mind is there, and you're willing to contribute and you want to learn as you go forward, which is such a huge thing, which brings up a great point. When you talk about being in that situation and keeping your head up and writing things down in terms of what your expectations are, when is it that it's time to move on for you? Is it when it gets too easy? Is it when nobody's listening? What are the things that you see that are big red flags outside of the toxicity thing that it's time to move into the next step?
Yeah. So I would start with saying, this is why it's so important we're working on our future, so that we are not hitting this point of it's time to go and now I have this big decision to make because of whatever the red flag is. Sometimes we graduate, if you will. Sometimes you're in a job and it becomes rinse and repeat, and you even have graduated that organization. In other words, as you look around and assuming that you're open to, that's not a career ladder, it's a career lattice. Is there a job widening? In other words, could I take on additional responsibilities in my same role? May not be a bigger title, but maybe I'm taking on new elements to stretch and learn and grow, and perhaps that comes with compensation? Is there a lateral or a lattice move I could make to continue to grow and express my potential? What's the succession plan of the person above me if I'm looking at that as a growth opportunity? And if you've put your aspirations into the universe, and as you look around at the company, if those lateral, lattice, seat widening, upward mobility, if your ability to grow and learn and fully build on your potential has been exhausted, that's a really good sign that you've graduated. You've probably graduated not only from that position, but that organization. It may just mean that the best thing is to move on, because for you to be able to continue to exercise your muscles, you're going to have to go into another role or another organization. I think if your aspirations are falling on deaf ears, I think if you're putting it out there and you're being blocked by somebody who has old school mentality about what it takes to get ahead. You've only been in the job 2 years, or this was said to me at one point, you're making good money for somebody your age.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Nothing like throwing you into the guilt thing, right? Oh, you don't deserve to ask for more.
Yeah, you don't. I'm in my 20-somethings. I'm killing it. I'm leading people older than me with more years of experience, but they've trusted me enough to put them under my leadership. But by golly, don't ask for more money or a commensurate title because you're making good money for somebody your age. Those are the signs that perhaps I've outgrown what is available to me here. But I can express enough that my hope would be that you're anticipating that way ahead of the game. You're seeing where the puck's gonna be, that you realize and you're watching for, that you're also building sponsorship outside your direct leader, right? Who are the other people of influence that can say your name in rooms you're not? Take those people to coffee. People outside your organization in your field. Here's what I want to do. Here's the path I'm on. What would you tell me about how I can grow and learn and accelerate my career? Those are the people that think of you in rooms that you aren't. When a project comes up and they say, ooh, you know what? Cynthia just mentioned to me last month that she has an interest in that. Well, guess what? If I had never said that, that person wouldn't know.
You remember back in the day, networking was it. We do
Yes.
little events and see people it's people in the same industry or maybe different offshoots of the industry. That's how we got out there. That we created relationships, which is the key, create relationships. The in-person networking used to be big. I'm not sure. I don't live in that world really anymore. Is that still a thing? What would be the best? Is LinkedIn effective? What would be your suggestion?
I think LinkedIn for professionals is by and large the place that you need to have a presence, and being active on LinkedIn. I think finding people in your area, your industry, your niche, your passion, and connecting with those people is really helpful. So that's a great place to build relationships. I know a lot of the Gen Z are much more comfortable in a virtual environment. You can have a virtual coffee, invite somebody to a virtual coffee. The wonderful thing about how globalized we are right now is that my network has expanded literally around the world. I can have a call with somebody in Singapore, or somebody in the UK I interviewed this week, and you build those relationships because so much work can be done anywhere these days, right? So I think whatever you're comfortable doing, it's a matter of being intentional, and that's really a through line for me. Everything's about intentionality. You have to be intentional.
You have to take action. You have to be intentional. You have to have the belief that you can do it and it's possible to get out there and you are worth something. And it makes a lot of sense to put yourself out there however you can and however you're comfortable. Even if you're introverted, you can go on LinkedIn. That's
100%.
right. Exactly.
Yeah.
I want to touch on this lastly as we wrap it up. Where does the rest of the life fit in to this transition? Where does a boyfriend, husband, kids, where does all that fit in?
Yeah, that's a great question that we're all seeking the answer to. My belief is that there is not work-life balance. My belief is there's work-life integration. There are times where life is taking more time. Perhaps you're dealing with an illness or preparing for a wedding or any number of things happy things, difficult things can happen in life and sometimes pull you away. There's other times that major projects, a season of a particular business is the tax business, their year in HR, but extremely crazy in the fall during benefits enrollment. So there's those kinds of flex times where it is stealing a whole lot more time from home. The bottom line is we have to reframe it as work-life integration instead of work-life balance. It's not going to be this equally 50-50 balance scale. And I hear a lot of Gen X and Gen Z say, I want to work to live, not live to work.
Right.
And so what I want for every single person, men and women, is ultimately figure out what are your gifts and talents, those things you do spontaneously with excellence that fill your cup, that give you intrinsic satisfaction, and figure out how you make a living doing that. Because then work-life integration becomes joyful and natural. It's when you are in the grind of punching in and punching out that it feels like there's never enough balance. And listen, that's a kind of an oversimplified approach because I was a working mom with a big career and traveled internationally and was getting my MBA and probably for another day, but that's where boundaries are really important to understand your personal and professional boundaries.
That's a really tough question to answer for everybody when it comes to that in terms of I love the work-life integration. I think that makes perfect sense. Thank you, Cynthia. I really appreciate it. Huge amounts of information. Last but not least, a quick bullet point. What are the 3 things that women should ask themselves as they're preparing to make their transition?
What do I value? What do I feel are my God-given or DNA hardwired gifts and talents? And how am I investing in my future today?
I love it. Cynthia Benson Mercer, PhD. Again, a couple doctors. You got to take a couple nuggets out of this, right? I really appreciate it. There's so much more that I can talk about. And the thing that I remembered just now is the fact that I was going to talk about doing a side gig that's your passion project versus doing something in an employment scenario that's actually paying the bills. Which is a whole other thing. And you just talked about it, how getting aligned. And I would love to have you back and we can talk about that. Can you tell everybody where to get a hold of you, where to buy the book, if they want your coaching expertise? Where is all that?
Absolutely. So we're on all the socials, but the easiest path is our website, which is www.zeal.com.
I love that. I got the visual.
Right.
Just with the heel.
Energy.
Like digging
and
in.
heel.
I love
That's
that.
right. That's right.
And of course, for me, it's TonyDufresne.com. And if you can't spell it, because nobody can, even family members can't do that, it's theconfidencedoc.com. I have a new masterclass coming out in the next couple weeks, which is about toxic relationships, how to get out of toxic relationships. There's also a little freebie that I have on the website. And if you have any questions or concerns or you want to do the half-hour coaching, email me at tony@theconfidencedoc.com. And we'll chat and let's see where you're at and what's going on. So I hope things are good, and I will talk to you next week.